Elias Thorne, and I have been trapped in this cabin for 3 days. It started as an escape. I needed to get away from MedTech, where I worked as a supplemental health and vitamin consultant. In truth, I was just a salesman, trading on my greatest assets, a bleached white smile and cobalt blue eyes that people said could pierce the soul. I spent my days selling wellness I didn't believe in, leaning on data that was technically true but morally hollow. I didn't miss the constant lying. I didn't miss the rush. I had brought a sidearm, bears were always a possibility, and bear mace as a secondary caution. The hike to my reserve cabin was short, the air thick with a hypnotic, dizzying heat that shimmered off the forest floor. At the trailhead, the small lot held only a few cars. One was a dusty blue sedan that looked as if it had been abandoned for days. I couldn't help myself. I traced-washed me to the thick grime of the trunk with a finger, grinning at my own small arrogance before disappearing into the brush. I used a machete, long, sharp, and eager to bite through the overgrown foliage. As I worked, I heard a sharp, rhythmic barking. It wasn't a dog. I smiled, the sound echoing through the timber. Love is in the air, I muttered, recognizing the telltale passion of the local foxes defending their dens or searching for mates. I loved this territory. It was teeming with life that didn't require a sales pitch. The cabin was a rustic, one-room sanctuary, a table, a few chairs, a fireplace, and a musty couch. No electricity, no gas. Perfect. The first night settled in with the distant yaps of the foxes providing a wild soundtrack to my solitude. Then came the scratch. It jolted me awake. It was soft, unnatural in its persistence. I looked out the window and caught a flash of a red tail, tipped in white and black, racing around the corner of the porch. "Sorry, Mrs. Fox," I called out through the heavy timber of the door. "I'm already seeing someone." I lay back down on the couch, watching the orange embers of my dinner dyeing the hearth. The deep night chill began to settle, and just as sleep pulled at me again, scratch. It was right under the window this time. I crept over and saw her, a vixen sitting by the door. Her tail twitched with a frantic, nervous energy. When my boots creaked on the floorboards, she bolted into the dark. I shrugged it off. Maybe she was a raider looking for a handout. But the next sound wasn't a play for food. It was a bark, low, sharp, followed by a guttural growl that set my teeth on edge. I'd grown up in these woods. I was intimate with the language of the animal kingdom. This wasn't a territorial warning. This was something else. Thunk. Something hit the bottom of the door hard. Then the frantic scratching began in earnest. She wanted in. Lightning suddenly split the sky, a blinding camera flash that etched a permanent silver-white picture behind my eyes. In that strobe light second, I saw her through the glass. Her ears were tattered, her coat a mess of mud and burrs. "The Mr. Not Treating You Right, Little Lady?" I was moved. Rain began to lash the porch. Hail hammered the roof like gunfire. I felt a pang of pity and unbolted the heavy latch, a simple iron mechanism used for centuries. But when the door cracked open, the vixen didn't rush in for warmth. She let out a hissed growl, backed away into the storm, and vanished into the dense thicket. An hour passed, then came the whine, a thin, high-pitched sound that bypassed my ears and went straight to my nerves. I couldn't shake the image of her. Her mouth had been foamy. Her eyes, those yellow, dilated orbs, had looked glassy and unnatural. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Rabies. Elias Thorne, the man with the soul-piercing eyes, was trapped in a box by a 5-pound predator. I grabbed my gun. I loaded it. I waited. She emerged from the trees just as the morning light began to gray the sky. The storm was still raging. The thunder provided deafening cover as I eased the window open and cocked the hammer. I took aim, resting my finger against the trigger guard, steeling my nerves as her shadow drifted closer.
My heart outraced any hair as I began to apply pressure to the trigger. Then, I stopped. In the next flash of lightning, I saw what was hanging limply from her jaws. It was a bundle of fur, wet with foam and rain, but it was moving. It was alive. The vixen approached the porch. She didn't lunge. She set the bundle down, a tiny, shivering pup, and took a final, defensive posture. She barked once, a broken, tragic sound, and then collapsed to her stomach, her body swaying with the final stages of the virus. She had made a final, desperate bid to save her pup from herself. She had brought it to the only giant she knew, hoping I was the man my blue eyes claimed I was. The foam dripped as she began to scream into the morning, a sound of pure, neurological agony. The gunshot followed. A chilling, final squeal escaped her lungs, drifting off into the trees. I let the silence of the woods swallow the echo, the smell of cordite mixing with the ozone in the rain. I waited 2 more days. The storm didn't just break, it settled in, a relentless gray shroud that turned the trails into treacherous rivers of mud and slate. I was trapped. Outside, on the edge of the porch, the mother's body lay limp, exactly where she had fallen. I watched the rain wash the foam from her jaws, her tattered red fur matting against the wood. She looked smaller in death, less like a monster, and more like a weary traveler who had finally reached her destination. Inside, the cabin was silent, save for the rhythmic scuff-scuff of the tiny survivor. I had made a makeshift bed for the pup out of an old flannel shirt and a wooden crate. He didn't have his mother's glassy yellow stare. His eyes were dark, curious, and hungry. I fed him bits of my rations, watching him navigate the small world of the crate. We were a strange pair, a medtech salesman who had lived a life of polished lies, and a wild orphan born of a tragedy. I spent those 48 hours staring at the door, then at the crate, and back at the body on the porch. There was no one to impress, no soul-piercing gaze required. I just sat in the quiet, listening to the rain, feeling the hardness I'd carried from the city begin to dissolve. By the 3rd morning, the sun finally cracked through the canopy, turning the wet leaves into a sea of flickering emeralds. The trails were safe again. I contacted the forest rangers as soon as I reached the trailhead. I handed over the reins to the professionals, watching as they tucked the small survivor into a carrier. I didn't ask for a reward or a write-up in the local paper. I just wanted him to have the chance his mother had died to give him. I keep coming back to that cabin every year, and every year I see a red fox darting through the foliage near the trailhead. I like to think it's him. I hope that in a world as wild and as honest as this one, he's thriving.
The end. Thank you for joining us for this story. Please like and subscribe.